Welcome to the virtual WAFLT 2020 conference. I'm Tamara Leonard, and I'm pleased to be here representing the University of Washington's Center for Global Studies. We'll be presenting an update on what languages are taught in Washington State, and I'll ask my colleagues to briefly introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Russ Hugo. I'm the Assistant Director of the Language Learning Center at the University of Washington.
Hello, I'm Veronica Trapani, the new World Languages Program Supervisor at the State Office of Superintendent of Public Instruction. I recently started in this position as of July 1st, 2020.
Hi, I'm Michelle Ancio Aoki. I'm now a World Languages and International Education Advocate, having retired from the position that Veronica is now filling at OSPI and as International Education Administrator for Seattle Public Schools. And I'm a member of the WAFLT testing team and advocacy chair.
Thanks, Michelle. The Mapping and Enhancing Language Learning in Washington State project has been a collaboration of the UW Center for Global Studies, the UW Language Learning Center, WAFLT, and OSPI since 2006.
Here are some of the questions that MELL has worked on over the years, and we're going to provide an update today with some of the latest data from 2019. First of all, what world languages are actually taught in our state and offered in schools? Where are they taught? Are enrollments going up or down? And what is the impact of world language competency-based credit testing? What should we do next about the data that we see now?
But first, let us provide a little more background on MELL. Our goal is to have MELL be a useful resource to educators, families, and policymakers throughout the state.
I'm excited to have these great partners at the University of Washington and with WAFLT to help me understand more about where languages are used or taught in our state. We need good data in order to make good policy around language teaching and learning. This supports our educators, our students, and the future of languages in our state.
And yes, we in higher ed also need to work more closely with K-12 educators to make sure we are attracting students who will be interested in our many opportunities for language learning. Here's a brief slide about the UW Center for Global Studies and what we can do to help support you in your work. Please reach out to me if you're interested in connecting or collaborating with us on a variety of educational or language-related projects.
For a quick orientation into what MELL does, this is a screenshot here of our current website. You can see at the menu bar, we have maps, reports, events, data, and then about where we can learn more. So primarily we try to produce some maps that show you where languages are being offered. We publish policy briefs and reports. We sponsor workshops and events and do participation in various events as well. And then we collect and analyze data.
So here's a little bit about where MELWA started. Actually, originally there was a survey that the World Languages Association, this Washington Association for Language Teaching, the University of Washington partnered on to just find out what schools were offering languages and how they were using technology. That was in 2004. So we've been gathering data and showing different kinds of graphs and things like that, but we realized we needed some kind of tool to communicate to the public and in particular to policymakers like people in our legislature about the status of languages in our state. So the question came up from our colleagues in higher ed, what languages are you teaching in K-12 schools? And nobody really knew. So we went back to our MELL surveys, and this was the first policy brief that we wrote, establishing an understanding of world language teaching trends. Of course, trends really take at least 3 points in time to be a trend, but this was the beginning. And even in this one, you can see the fact that some languages were kind of increasing and some were decreasing between 2004 and 2007.
So in 2010, MELL was lucky enough to get access to CEDARS, which is known as the Comprehensive Education Data and Research System at OSPI. And it allows us to get enrollment data on world languages as reported directly to the state by the districts themselves. This was particularly nice because we no longer had to be solely dependent on voluntary surveys. And so here are a couple examples from some of our later policy briefs with some trend data. You can see that by 2012, virtually all high schools reported offering Spanish. French was in just over 50% of schools, and German, Japanese, and ASL were in about 27 to 28% of schools. Chinese had almost reached 12% of schools reporting.
We continued those kinds of analyses of the CEDARS data over the years and additional policy briefs. But then we also expanded with some briefs, for example, about online learning through the Digital Learning Commons, and also what languages were being taught in Washington's community colleges. So this report, for example, showed some interesting revelations, and you could say, if you look to table 1 on the left, obviously Spanish, I shouldn't say obviously, but it is the case that Spanish is always the big language in our state, followed by French. And then we tend to have German, Japanese, and ASL kind of pretty close to each other. Sometimes one language is more common than the other in terms of being taught in the schools. And by 2014, we already had begun to get data, actually even earlier than that, because we started testing in around 2010, 2011 with the competency-based credit testing. So the languages that you see, Arabic, Somali, Tagalog, Korean, those were all languages where students earn credits through testing rather than through attending a seat time class. Russian was kind of a mix, and Vietnamese was also through competency-based credit testing. Now, over in the community college side, on the other hand, you see that interestingly, ASL is more commonly offered in community colleges by 2016 than is French or Japanese or Chinese for that matter. So that's kind of an interesting comparison. And we're just very grateful to the University of Washington for the funding that they get through the Title VI centers, that we can continue to explore how these numbers develop over time. So here we are. Now it's 2019. This summer, OSPI was able to provide to us the latest set of data. We're usually about a year behind. So this is the data from school year 2018-2019. So the first thing we were looking at is what was the number of schools that were offering different languages and what percentage of all schools were offering that language. So you can see that Spanish was offered in 445 schools, and it was 92.13% of the total number of schools offering a language. And French was about 45%, so behind Spanish, but still quite a bit further ahead than the others. American Sign Language, interestingly enough, had creeped up to 25%. And then German and Japanese are practically the same. Chinese is a little lower than it had been earlier, about 9% of schools. And interestingly, American Indian languages, which are normally offered in tribal schools, for example, is actually showing up as one of the top languages offered by schools in our state. Here's a continuation of this. Now, languages like Russian, Korean, Vietnamese, Tagalog, Arabic, Somali, most of those are going to be competency-based credit testing. Latin is taught in the schools, but it's been offered in a diminishing number of schools over the years. What you'll notice is that there weren't very many schools that reported offering these languages like Vietnamese and Tagalog. So what we found out was that for some reason, the districts had not been getting their data reported to CEDARS. So we were missing a number of large districts like Seattle, Highline, Bellevue, and others to report their competency-based credit testing data. We'll talk more about that in just a moment. Do you have any thoughts you want to share on this first set of the schools results, Veronica? Anything stand out to you?
Well, I did want to make a note on the American Indian languages that those could be a group, but that they are individual languages. So we're not really sure at the moment which languages are being taught more. So that's something that hopefully in the future we'll be able to break down further and get a better idea of what actual native or tribal languages are being taught, are being spoken, and are being utilized within our schools.
Right. Of course, we have grouped these languages according to the designation in the OSPI CEDARS system. Sometimes the district course titles do give us a little bit more clarity about what language is involved. So we'll go back and take a closer look for those as well. So we've just looked at schools, and this is actually enrollments. So what are the languages taught in our state based on enrollments? Similarly to the number of schools, the enrollment standards are kind of similar, Spanish being the largest. Of course, it's not 94% of all enrollments, but it is 64%. French is next, but even so, you'll see that the percentage of students doing French and American Sign Language, the enrollments are actually kind of small compared to the number of schools. Because remember, the percentage of schools offering it, 45% and 25%, looks kind of good, but the actual percentage of enrollments not so big. Japanese, German, Chinese, and other languages. And I'm going to go back to this one and see if Veronica has any comments on this slide.
I just think it's important to note that this is the number of credits that are awarded. So for some students, it might be 4, for some, it might be 2. So it is sometimes a little bit hard to judge. We obviously do have a much larger Spanish population, but when we're looking at this data, it does not tell us, did these students go all 4 years? Are most of our students taking only 2 years? We're not really sure at this point. It's a good start. And so hopefully the more credits earned, the better.
Yeah, that's a really good point. We can go back to the data and actually look by level too. So that's it may be a further study that we want to consider doing this year. Because there's a designator in CEDARS for whether the credits were competency-based credits or not competency-based credits, these are the ones that were not competency-based. So the students, they were either in a seat time class or they may have done an online course or alternative learning of some sort. Now we're going to take a look at the ones that were designated as in CEDARS as competency-based credit testing. One of the things that was interesting is that a couple of years ago, OSPI CEDARS made a change in their coding, and a lot of languages at the state level stopped being identified as a separate language, but were just lumped under world language. So it's not really clear which languages those were. We can do some further analysis with the district data to see if the course titles there give us a better idea. And that's probably something we'll want to do, I imagine, Veronica. So here's the first bunch, the top numbers that were tested, and the next bunch. In the other languages totals, which were fairly small, that included Portuguese, Samoan, Korean, Chinese, Amharic, and Polish. Again, as I mentioned earlier, the problem is that we know that there were hundreds of students who tested whose data was not reflected in the CEDARS file this year. So Veronica, any comments on any of this part around the testing?
Well, you could definitely see the difference between the non-competency tested and the competency tested students, because here, well, yes, Spanish does come out on top. We're looking at quite a few Russian compared to SEAT. So this is why it's so important for our students to have the opportunity to A, take the competency credits, but also B, why it's important for our, whether it's counselors, teachers, world language directors, to make sure that that is properly input into CEDARS so that we at OSPI can have a really up-to-date and accurate portrayal of what languages are being taught where. Because again, once we start looking at the maps, you can see that there sometimes are discrepancies or areas where we can reach out and also improve current language environment for those teachers.
So our next question, where are they taught?
MELL uses maps, and we'll use a mapping visualization to show language offerings based on county. And also information on this page is provided to see the chronological changes. We'll jump over and look at the website here.
So here we are on the MELL site with our newest page, the 2019 high school county maps. There's a little bit of an introduction, and we also offer the link to the CEDARS website at OSPI, so you can learn more about that database. And also, this is an Excel file here that you can download that has all the data that we analyzed from CEDARS, and it actually has a tab for each language. So that can be kind of convenient if you're interested in knowing where Japanese is taught. For example, you can find out exactly which schools and in which counties they are. Washington's not a very big state, but we have about 295 districts now, I think it is. It goes up and down every once in a while, but about 295. And so if we tried to do a map with those, it would be so tiny, it would be really hard to see. So we decided to use the map of our counties instead, because it still gives a good sense of equity in particular. Our first map is all those counties that offer at least 2 years of a world language. And fortunately, all of them are green. So that's how it's been for a number of years, as it should be. However, if you look at which counties have schools that offer 4 or more years, you'll see that a lot of the counties, especially in Eastern Washington, are excluded. So that suggests that we're not offering equitable opportunities to students to, for example, to get the seal of biliteracy, because Veronica, wouldn't you agree, they need 4 more years or maybe an AP level course to have a chance to do that, unless they're
Absolutely.
a speaker and have already achieved that level.
Absolutely. And the fact is, we're not sure when that county data, there could be multiple schools. So we're not guaranteeing that every school is offering at least 2 years, but that there is something within that county seat that will allow a student to take 2 years. But we would love to see all of this be green within the next few years as we work on reaching out to certain districts.
And another one we look at is counties that have districts that have schools that offer 2 or more languages. So as you know, all of these counties offer Spanish, but do they offer any other language? That's, again, one of those things that we're not really giving a full opportunity for students to be globally prepared if we're just limiting our language offerings to Spanish. Here we go, language by language now. So Spanish, no surprises. Here's French. Oh, I should maybe note that sometimes which counties are offering or not offering changes. So we make a note of what the count was from year to year. So actually Ponderay County over here had not reported offering it in 2017, but they did report offering French in 2019. Here's German. You want to say a thing or two about German maybe?
Well, it's very interesting to see that we have it here along the I-5 corridor, but there actually are quite a few in Eastern Washington, at least in the county. There is a school that is offering German, but then again, on the coast, it's lacking. So it really could be dependent upon what students and parents are asking for, what they're interested in, or it could be simply the difficulty of finding a certain teacher, German being one that's not as commonly taught and not as commonly studied. So it really can depend on who and what they want and what they're able to offer.
Here's ASL, American Sign Language. And it's been about 25 counties for several years. It was 27 actually in 2013, 28 in 2012. So I do know from my own experience in Seattle that on the one hand, people are enthusiastic about ASL. On the other hand, it seems to be really hard to get a program going and staying consistent. I think that's one of the problems I see in a map like this: 3 counties added and 3 dropped. So you're not making a consistent program if you're changing what languages are offered from year to year. Here's Japanese. So again, it's each year, it's some of the counties have dropped. But in this case, they added several counties as well. But that makes me feel like it's very unstable if counties are dropping and offering. And I don't mean to imply, of course, that counties are making those decisions. They're not. It's made by districts, but districts are within a context that probably indicates whether something is valued or not. And here's Chinese. And I should say Happy Moon Festival. Chinese friend just delivered some food for dinner tonight. Anyway, Chinese also had really had an upswing about around from 2010 on, and even got up by 2014 to 17 counties offering Chinese. But in 2019, it was down to 11 counties offering Chinese. Veronica, have you given much thought about Chinese in your general experience in world languages?
I think that also we want to mention that current political climate can also make it tough for certain programs. Not saying that any of these can't eventually have a resurgence, not saying that it will continue to go down, as we've seen some go up, some go down, but it just all depends on, can we get the educators? Do we have the friendship agreements, things like that, in order to make sure that we can keep these programs afloat?
Exactly. Latin is here, Native American languages, Russian. Again, most of the Russian is going to be competency-based credit testing, except Spokane does have a class still in East Valley School District. Arabic, this time there were 3 other counties that had been reporting it and they dropped, but I think it's because their competency-based credits weren't reported. Italian, again, is almost always competency-based credits. Korean is actually taught now in Pierce County and Tacoma, but most of the others are competency-based credits. And then Vietnamese, the fact that King County is not here just shows you that all of King County's data from competency-based credits was missing. And Somali did get one school, at least was a reporting, and Tagalog. And then here's just so you have an idea of like how many high schools are actually in each county. So you can see that some are very small. Several have only 1 high school in them. And this was the record of which reported offering competency-based credits. That's the maps.
I would also like to point out that the usefulness of these maps is something where if people are interested in starting dual language programs or have an interest in heritage languages, by seeing where this language is already offered, while it does not give specific schools, this could give educators and those around the state ideas as to where they might want to focus their efforts to start and then can be moved out. So having that Russian program there is wonderful, and maybe branching out to districts around, you might have a population that's going to be a little bit more willing to support those programs.
Exactly. And if we go to the maps page here, you'll see that we've got maps starting from 2007. So there's a lot of maps you can go see and get a sense. We even had one in 2014 around the dual language immersion programs that had been reported at that time. So we're going to leave the website now. Now we're going to just take a quick look at the beginnings to answer the question of are enrollments going up or down. For that kind of question, we want to look at trend data. And in MELL, we have data from 2010, 2017, and 2019. And so you can very quickly see some of the changes over time. I am kind of curious how it was that in 2017, there were 488 high schools, and in 2019, 483. Did our state actually lose 5 high schools, or did somebody just not report? But anyway, that's that part. Do you see anything that you want to comment on, Veronica, here?
Well, I'm really interested again, and my office has been working with the Office of Native Ed. And so looking at our tribal or American Indian languages, I'm very interested if the schools, the tribal schools were reported and what that data is going to look like. I'm also slightly concerned as a former German educator, seeing that we went from 108 German down to 91. But we even saw, French lost 5 and even Spanish losing 4. So, a lot of our more commonly taught languages are all kind of feeling the strain, I think. And it will be very interesting to see what data we collect after 2020 in this period.
And I think you can really see clearly the impact of not getting complete data, because you had 20 schools offering Korean in 2017, 29 Vietnamese, and we're down to 6 and 3 here, for example. So clearly we're missing data. We don't want to jump to conclusions when we know that testing happened, but it just didn't get reported. One thing we did want to touch on, what is the impact of world language competency-based credit testing? One of the things when we launched that program in 2010 was some people assumed that would mean that we might lose a lot of enrollments in our regular classes. I don't think we've exactly seen that, but it's a little hard to say. We need to kind of dig deeper into the data. But one of the things that we definitely noticed that's shown right here on this page, which is from the MAPS page, is the list of languages that were reported in 2017, like Afrikaans, Bosnian, Brazilian, Portuguese, Bulgarian, Burmese, Turkish, Danish, Dutch, et cetera, Marathi, Tigrinya, Twi, Urdu, and Wolof. We didn't see all of those less commonly taught languages showing up in the data this time, again, because we didn't have complete data files. So I think we are interested to still look at what the impact is. Anecdotally, I have heard from many students who have earned competency-based credits for, say, Russian, for example, that they still also studied Spanish or French in school. So it's often the case that people who are very fluent in one language are excited about learning another. And I think that's something we could build on. So here we are. This is kind of our little round table. What should we do next? And we'll just kind of touch on these for a moment and show you the last slide, which has our contact information. And then I think we'll just stop the share and talk for a few more minutes more informally about where we'd like to see MELL go in the coming year and what kind of data we'd like to collect. We've mentioned this several times, the issues about CEDAR's reporting. If we're not getting all the data, then what we're reporting is just not accurate quite. Another point is that our state currently doesn't really have a way to identify students that came through dual language and immersion programs. And so then it's really hard to identify if those students are showing up in the data and if that leads to increased results and so on. And then we have a more general question. We have a newish 2-credit world language graduation requirement in our state. It went into effect at the state level in 2019, but a number of districts, including Seattle, had waivers until 2021. And so one question is going to be, how did COVID-19 affect that? I'm not sure if that waiver got excused for this year because of that, of the distance learning and so on, or the remote learning. So we'll talk more on this theme in just a moment, but I just wanted to bring up our contact information. Please feel free to contact any of us with questions about MELL or ideas for things that we should be studying further. And we're going to just, I think, step into a little bit of conversation. So what does everybody think?
Well, thank you very much, Michelle and Veronica and Russ, for all your contributions. On behalf of the Center for Global Studies, I want to reach out to all of you, our audience. We've talked about a lot of issues and topics that we're interested in. Those are of interest to me as well, personally. But I'm also interested in hearing from you. The Center for Global Studies is a convener and a connector and a hive. So there's lots of resources that we have or that we can avail ourselves of at the University of Washington. So if you in the audience have ideas about how MELL can help you, what you need in your district, what language questions you have that we haven't considered, please do reach out to us. You have our contact information. It will help us make MELL work for you. And that is really one of our major goals here, is to help MELL work for the educators, the teachers, the students, the parents, and the policymakers of Washington State.
I also wanted to kind of piggyback on that the Office of Public Instruction, we are here at this, Superintendent of Public Instruction, we are here to work for you. I am here. And so if there are issues, concerns, programs, I'd love to hear about it, especially coming in new to the state of Washington. I was in Michigan before this. So I am learning a lot about Washington and the world language communities. All three here have been very helpful, but I would love for our educators, and we're all stakeholders in our public education. And so reach out to me, please send me ideas of things that you're doing. And I'd love to be able to feature programs as well in future newsletters.
There are two things that were brought up earlier, both Veronica and Michelle touched on, and one of those being what specific Indigenous or Native American languages are taught. And we did a survey back in around 2010 that kind of looked in, we did collect that information. But then the second question Michelle was highlighting is how much continuity, what are the links of these programs? How long have they existed, or new ones being formed? Are they disappearing? I think a really important piece of information the MELL data can provide people, especially policymakers, is getting a better understanding of actually what is required in the sense of scale and long-term investment to get a solid program running. And with languages like Indigenous languages or less commonly taught languages that don't have a lot of resources that are existing to use, it takes a lot more effort and a lot more time to get something up that's stable, in addition to student interest and promoting it. So it's a good thing to be aware of, and the more data that we can get to provide to you, the educators and the parents and the policymakers, to understand we can't initiate a program without support, expect it to become hugely successful in a year, have it disappear and say, the students didn't want it or it wasn't working. And so I think this is a really important value that MELL and the analysis can provide. So I appreciate all the work everybody's doing.
Well, I'm just excited to have our team kind of reconvened here. Russ has been working on this with me since he was a graduate student. And I think, Tamara, you've been around working on it pretty much the whole time, about 14 years, I think. For me, it was always a labor of love on top of other jobs that I had. And now that I'm retired, I feel like this is really a central task for advocacy. Advocacy without data is not very helpful. And so I'm super excited about Veronica being at the OSPI and our opportunities to work together on all these things. So thank you, WAFLT, for allowing us to do a session this time. And I hope whoever is watching this video at some time that you're having a great day.